Before I start this video, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's helped me reach 500 subscribers. And to celebrate, I think this clip is very appropriate to play.
Hip hip hooray! That's all, folks.
And once again, thanks for supporting this channel, liking and commenting on the videos, and I hope the future content will be just as worthy as the past stuff. And now, without further ado, let's get on to the video. Akito the Exiled received and continues to receive mixed reviews from the fans. Some fans like this spin-off story with a new lead, while others thought it differentiated itself too much from Geass. Plus, not having Lelouch as the lead did not help matters. And then there's, of course, this. Now, you were probably expecting the review of R2 to come out, since I just reviewed R1.
Well, surprise!
You get the Akito the Exiled one first. And the reason is, I'm still working on R2 as we speak, and I thought it made sense to discuss the OVA now, since it does take place between R1 and R2 chronologically. If you're wondering where I stand in this OVA, well, I see both viewpoints, but overall, I enjoyed Akito the Exiled. With this review, expect heavy spoilers, since I assume you have seen the OVA or never planned to. With that in mind, let's suit into Alexander's, travel to the EU, fight Euro-Britannians, and kill our parents? This is my Akito the Exiled thorough analysis. I first learned about Akito the Exiled when it was announced in 2010. I remember seeing an ad for it. There was in fact two things coming out, a new anime, Akito the Exiled, and Renya of Darkness, a manga series, neither being a continuation from R2. The fanbase was naturally quite excited until they realized that Lelouch was not going to be the main star in either of these new pieces of content. At least that's how I felt after this initial announcement. As a result, I avoid this series like the plague, using any excuse possible to avoid watching it. One of those was the new CGI for the Knightmare Frames, which still divide the fan base to this day. I even allowed the bad reviews from Mal to justify why the series is not worth my time. Eventually, I decided to give it a watch a few years ago. My initial reactions were on the meh scale. To be fair, I was only watching it as background noise, so it was not really a fair way to judge the OVA. After careful considerations, I decided to watch it one more time, and this time I was engaged, taking notes while watching attentively. And you know what? After doing this, I realized that Akito the Exiled was not bad. Actually, it was pretty good. It had flaws for sure, but the pros definitely outweighed them. I know this intro part has nothing to do with the story of Akito the Exiled, but I felt you need to know my perspective and my biases towards the series before I actually start the review. And let's do that by first discussing the main characters. Since this is a 5-episode OVA series, the cast is way smaller in comparison with the original series. Our main protagonist is Leila Malchal, an officer of the EU. Leila's past is interesting because even though she's fighting alongside the EU, her family actually comes from Britannia. Leila experienced the loss of both her parents at a young age. And after her mother's death, she meets C2 in the forest, who rescues her from certain death, and then offers her a contract with the stipulation that Leila has until adulthood to accept it. Losing your parents at a young age is awful, but it gets worse for Leila as she's eventually adopted by the wealthy Malchal family, whose actual intentions behind this was to marry her off to their son and her adoptive brother, since Leila has noble blood. Thankfully, this pseudo-incest element in the OVA is not an important part of the story. In fact, once you learn about it the first time, it thankfully never comes up again. What's more important to the story is Leila's role as the leader of the W0 unit. The unit's main goal is to help the EU fight against the Euro-Britannians, often using 11s as suicide bombers when they pilot the Knightmare Frames. By the way, as a side note, since I'm referring to the Japanese as 11s, you can already guess how the EU feels about them. Spoiler alert, they don't like them, and they treat them about the same as the Britannians. What I love about Leila, besides being easy on the eyes, is how she's a good person at heart. She reminds me of Yuffie and how she legitimately cared about the Japanese people. Helping them came first, and the priorities of the leaders second. Leila also happens to fall in love with a Japanese man, much like Yuffie. I love her innocence when she's out of her element when helping out the gypsies. She's a brilliant leader even at a young age, and always likes to lead by example. For example, in OVA 2, She went on a mission with Akito, Yukiya, Ayano, and Ryu, even though it put herself in unnecessary harm's way. And she might be pretty, but she will break you in two with her excellent Aikido skills, and I assume that making this character know this martial art was not an accident. In the opening mission of Akito the Exiled, we see the Japanese soldiers of the W0 unit acting as suicide bombers against the Britannian forces. One of those troops survives, and that's Akito Hyuga, the other main character of this story. He is then assigned to Leila after the mission. Akito Hyuga is more introverted and not much of a showman, and more stoic when compared to Lelouch. Although I did notice some similarities between Lelouch's high school persona, Lamperouge, and Akito's normal demeanor. Akito is actually quite intelligent, offering a unique perspective in various conversations, and much like Lelouch, he's able to inspire loyalty in his troops, albeit in his own way. Not only is Akito stoic, he also does not have any major aspirations for life. In fact, most of the story he regrets not dying with his troops, or when Shin, his half-brother, failed to kill him with his Geass. Akito was an excellent soldier and ruthless in battle. Even though Shin's Geass did not kill Akito, it left him with a curse. Every time Akito gets into battle, the effect of that Geass triggers, much like the command to make Suzaku live. He starts to lose control, shouting "die," and goes into a blood rage. If others are linked via brainwaves, eventually they will become affected as well. This is dubbed as a brain raid. Akito struggles with the effect of Geass, much like Suzaku, and through this struggle he goes through serious character growth. My favorite moments of growth are when Akito stops acting like an accident and starts living, and how he holds himself back from killing Ashley. Some of these changes are thanks to Leila, Ryu, Ayano, and Yukiya, who bring out the best in him. I mentioned already that the W0 unit is battling the Euro-Britannians, which are people in the EU who support Britannia. One of the weapons of the Euro-Britannians are the different holy orders, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, which also happen to be names of the angels in the Bible. These are similar to the Knights of the Round in the aesthetic of their uniform and Knightmare Frames, but they are much weaker by comparison. In OVA 2, after killing Manfredi, Shin Hyuga becomes the new leader of the Holy Order of Michael. He is the half-brother of Akito, an honorary Britannian, and serves as the main antagonist in the story. His nihilistic attitude makes him the perfect foil for Leila, who loves life and wants to protect her loved ones. His Geass power reflects this as well, as it makes people kill themselves or kill others. When I first watched this show, I used to think that his power was a rip-off from Lelouch's, but his power is more than a simple command for those to die. It causes the desire in people to kill to spread like a virus. We see this with how it spread from Akito to the other W0 members, or how it spread from his adoptive sister to his mother, and even on some level was affecting him. Also, people under the command don't just obey it to die, but internalize the same belief. People under Lelouch's command did not always do this. I like the simplicity of Shin's belief that people are better off dead since living is a curse. He is even comfortable around dead people because he sees nothing wrong with it. Or does he? There are parts in the story where he talks to the ghosts of people from the past. Some of them include his past kills. I'm not sure if this was a result of his Geass, insanity, or both. He almost gives in to the ghost to take his own life as well. What I like about this scene is that it shows that Shin never hated those he killed. Rather, he loves them. That is why he killed them in the first place, and hopes to join them one day. Let's move on to the other antagonist, Sir Julius Kingsley. Julius Kingsley is the name of the personality that Lelouch takes on after Charles implants false memories on him. This new personality has much of Lelouch's intelligence and tenacity, except that he supports Britannia unconditionally, and that of course includes the Emperor. Other members of the Euro-Britannians call him a puppet of the Empire. Julius, throughout his stay in Euro-Britannia, is being guarded by Suzaku Kurorugi, who at this time is now the Knight of Seven. Julius's role is to help the Euro-Britannians defeat the EU. I assume that Julius would have become the new ruler of the EU if this came into fruition. He enacts his plan to use a fake terrorist attack to panic people dubbed Ark Fleet, which would allow the Euro-Britannians to take advantage of the chaos and conquer the EU. Shin pointed out during their chess game that this plan seemed similar to something that Zero would do, even suggested that they are the exact same thing. Besides serving the Emperor, the other conflict with Julius is that he constantly is fighting Lelouch for control of his body. There are even moments where Lelouch freaks out and screams randomly, but usually he just asks for water, and Suzaku reluctantly refuses or begrudgingly gives him some. While I'm not sure if the character was needed for this story, I did enjoy his presence on screen. Due to time constraints, I'm not going to discuss in detail about Ayano, Yukiya, Ryu, Anna, Ashley, or Joan. Here is a quick thought on each. I like how Ayano has similar attributes to Colin, but stands on her own as a completely different character. I love her devotion to her friends, and she's a heck of a Knightmare Frame pilot and dancer. It's hard to explain why, but I often prefer her over Colin. Yukiya is the brilliant hacker with the team and has a weird perspective on the world. Not my favorite character, but he grew on me with each OVA in the series. Ryu is an awesome character as he is a fierce fighter, but he's not a moron. Just a down-to-earth guy who never takes things too seriously. I wish the original series had a character like him, and he's one of my favorites in the OVA. Anna is a genius who created the Alexanders, and they hint to this being only the tip of what she can actually do. I'm curious to see if we'll ever see more of her. Plus, she had a strong connection to Leila since they are childhood friends. Ashley is interesting because he's cocky and arrogant, but deep down cares about his subordinates. His desire to save Shin led him to joining the W0 unit, and this is one of the best parts of his character within the story. Plus, I really like the different Knightmare Frame he uses. John, much like Ashley, was an orphan that was saved by Shin, and she loves Shin and is very devoted to him, even willing to go down with him in his insanity, which reminds me of someone. John's character is really good, and this is how Shirley could have been handled in Code Geass. Akito the Exiled distinguishes itself from the original series with its use of CGI, and this is a common complaint with the series. In R2, there was some use of CGI, and it's similar to Akito, for example when they zoom in and out during certain scenes. Most of the additional CGI added in Akito is tame, and does effectively enhance the animations. In particular, I noticed its use in the backgrounds, the computers, and most obvious, the Knightmare Frames. Sometimes it looks terrible, but it's not even close to the level of Knights of Sidonia or Berserk 2016. Since Knightmare Frames are an important part of the series, let's move on to that. The Knightmare Frames were enhanced by CGI and not for the better. One of my issues is that when the Knightmare Frames are not moving, it's hard to figure out which model it is. For example, in the opening scene, it took me longer than it should to figure out that Akito was fighting Sutherlands. But I will admit that eventually my eyes did adjust to the CGI, allowing me to distinguish the different Knightmare Frames. When they did not use CGI on the Knightmare Frames, they looked much better, and I wish they had just stuck with that for the entire series. I'm glad that in Lelouch of the Resurrection, they learned from this and did a much better job of combining the CGI with the Knightmare Frames. One great thing that did come from the CGI was the improved Knightmare Frame combat. Battles are more intense, which includes even minor skirmishes, and some of these battles rival the level of Gurren vs. Lancelot in the original series. The reason for that is that the combat has evolved past simple shootouts and hand-to-hand combat. For example, when Akito pilots the Alexander, he moves back and forth in quick succession, dodging bullets and then moving in for a quick strike. There's more strategy involved in the combat now than there ever was in the original series. They also added more realism in the fights. For example, Knightmare Frames now sustain more damage than the original. There was definitely times in the original series where you saw the effects of battle on the Knightmare Frames, but the majority of the time, one shot was all it took to destroy most Knightmare Frames. But in this OVA, even the lowest generation Knightmare Frames were required to sustain heavy damage before being defeated. It actually takes work for even Suzaku to take down Sutherlands using the Lancelot. There's a great part where Suzaku uses the hands and the feet of the Lancelot in combat, making it more intense and personal. And this trend is used in all the fights in Akito the Exiled. It's one of the reasons why I enjoyed the combat in Akito over the original series, even if sometimes it's hard to follow what's happening on screen. In OVA 4, Memories of the Hatred, and OVA 5, To Be Loved Ones, we get two insane combat scenes involving the Knightmare Frames. In OVA 4, the Alexanders go from Apollo's chariot to landing on the Ark, And what follows is an insane fight between the Alexanders and Ashley with a very emotional ending. In OVA 5, Akito with the W0 unit fights Shin one last time, and I enjoyed it way more than Count and Suzaku's fight at the end of R2. I liked how it goes from simple Knightmare Frame combat and eventually breaks out into a big sword fight between Shin and Akito. You get something similar with Count vs Suzaku, where over the course of their battle, different parts of their Knightmare Frame breaks off until they are both just fighting in the vanilla versions of their Knightmare Frame. But I like this fight more because it had more tension with Akito and Shin, who really wanted to kill each other. By contrast, Colin just wanted to defeat Suzaku in combat. Killing him was never that important. Besides the combat, they also added new lore to the Knightmare Frames. For example, when Akito battles Ashley, he changes his ammo type, and we are introduced to the concept of having unmanned drones instead of pilots for different Knightmare Frames. The Alexander and the Versicantrox are similar to the Tristan and the Shinkiro, where they can transform. With the Alexander and the Versicantrox, they can transform from combat mode to, I guess, beast mode, and this allows them to travel faster, and it also changes the combat up a little bit. Let's hope we see more innovations like that in Zia the Recapture and other future Code Geass content to come. Besides the Knightmare Frames, Akito the Exiled added so much lore to the Geass mythos, even if not all of it makes sense. The biggest contribution is probably the introduction of the collective consciousness, a being that watches the universe and told Leila that it gave the humans Geass. I think this was the being that Lelouch asked to stop the Ragnarok connection, and could have been the one that consumed Charles and Marianne. We do see this god get involved in the story, like when it teleports Ashley to kill General Smilus, so this theory could be correct. And this is why I wish they showed this character in the new recap films when Lelouch used his command in C's World. They had no issues mentioning Akito the Exiled in those films, so why didn't they do that? We'll just have to wait for the new game to come out to see her in action again. Now, in this story, she helps Leila unlock her Geass, which is another thing they added. 2 new Geass powers, one for Shin and one for Leila. And here's what we learned from those new abilities. A non-traditional code user can give out Geass even without a contract. Shin got his through a skull and killed his father to seal the deal. It's never fully explained how this works or what the skull was. I read some theories that say the skull belongs to Shin's dad, who was a past Geass user. And an effect of a Geass can transfer to others. This was the brain ray that occurred when Akito battles Knightmare Frames, but we also see Shin's Geass affect his adoptive sister and mother. A person can choose to accept a contract at a later time to activate their Geass power. Leila's offered a contract from C2 when she was a child, but then accepts it later in life. And like Marianne, it activates right before she was going to die. A single Geass can have many abilities. Leila's Geass is never fully explained, so it could have been one single ability, or it could have had many. It allowed her to travel back in time, connect to the consciousness of others, and see into the minds of others. They also made the same color as Jeremiah's Geass Chancellor. I'm glad we are getting more colors for different Geass users. If a fragment of the Geass can give Leila this kind of power, I wonder what the shards of Shamna's Geass can do. I mentioned earlier that Leila is a foil to Shin, and it's interesting that their Geass also work in the same way. Leila brings people together, and Shin's does the exact opposite. Just another interesting observation on the story. Now I want to address some points of Akito the Exiled that I was not a fan of. The first being the plot. It was very confusing at times. The initial conflict took me a couple of rewatches to fully figure out. If you got on your first go, then I must be really slow then. I just felt that Lelouch of the Rebellion did a much better job in answering the who, what, where, how, and why when it came to the plot. Let me give some examples of what I'm talking about. The goal of the W0 unit is not tangible. All we know is that they're trying to stop the Euro-Britannians from defeating the EU through covert operations. They never state how exactly they will do this or what victory looks like. For example, in the second OVA, they use Apollo's chariot to aid the EU in battle. The entire conflict was just Alexander's fighting the Order of Michael to a standstill, and when it's over, we learn that the EU prevailed. My question is, what did the W0 actually do that helped out the EU here? It seemed like the Order of Malchal was not even doing anything at the time until the Ghost of Hannibal even arrived. So defeating them would have made no difference in the conflict to begin with. Heck, the Euro-Britannians' retreat order occurred even though the Ghosts of Hannibal were defeated by Shin. So I was really confused by this. I understand they won, but the victory had nothing to do with them. But the biggest issue for me was at the end. When Ashley kills General Smiles, the EU loses a crucial battle, and as a result, half of its territory goes to the Euro-Britannians. But for some reason, this is considered a happy ending. I'm confused here. I thought the point of the story was to prevent this from happening. And what's even more frustrating, I had to learn about this secondhand in Lancelot and Gurren, the manga, since the OVA does not fully explain what happened at the end and tries to make it seem like it was a good ending, when it clearly wasn't. And that's the problem. I know the EU doesn't win here because in R2, Suzaku was shown fighting in the EU, and through the conversations we learned that Schneisel is decimating them. It was a strange way to present this ending as a positive when it wasn't, and it seems to go against what the W0 unit was fighting for to begin with. And one of the reasons why I think this issue exists in the plot is because Akito the Exiled was rushed. It only has 5 OVAs, and definitely needed more time to flesh out this world better and to properly explain things, which is why it boggles my mind that they wasted time with the gypsies in OVA 3. I understand that filler is important to develop characters and the relationship with each other, but when you only have 5 OVAs to work with, filler needs to be brief, not an entire episode. Compare this to Hellsing Ultimate, which wastes no time in its 10 episodes. One of the casualties of having filler like this is Leila's Geass. They never explain or hint what the abilities could be, so when its power is revealed, instead of thinking, oh, that makes sense, they've been hinting that from the start. Instead, you're thinking to yourself, what just happened? Huh? What? What? What's going on? No, seriously, what's going on? This was an important part of the story and should have been explained. I don't care if some people have been able to put some pieces together and come up with interesting theories. None of those are confirmed. Now, there's nothing wrong with having ambiguity with your story. For example, on Code Geass R2, you had that person with the carriage, and we didn't know who that was. But we did know how Lelouch's Geass worked. This part in Akito the Exiled was literally one of the most important developments of the story, and it's a shame because generally speaking, Code Geass is great at explaining things, even at a simple level. I'm not sure how anyone can defend this part of the story. Rather than go through more complaints, I will instead ask some questions that I have about Akito the Exiled, and if anyone knows the answer, please let me know in the comment section below. And while we're on this subject, if any of my past critiques are wrong, please let me know. I don't make these videos to hear myself talk. In fact, I hate the sound of my voice. The purpose is to have a conversation with you guys. Now, let's start with those questions. Why did Shin not kill Lelouch when he claimed he did? How did Lelouch and Suzaku get locked up when Suzaku defeated Jean and could have easily killed Shin before he shot Lelouch? I mentioned this last part of the question because he should not have surrendered to Shin if that's what even happened. You could go even further with what would have happened if Jean defeated Suzaku? Would that have caused a civil war in Britannia between the Euro-Britannians and the rest of Britannia? I have no idea. Just a thought that came to my head. Why does Charles not send anyone until the end of Akito the Exiled for Lelouch? If Lelouch is vital to his plans to get C2 out of hiding, why wait this long? Why does Charles even send Lelouch to EU in the first place if he just needs him to lure out C2? Remember, Charles doesn't care about the mundane affairs of war. He just wants the Ragnarok connection to start. What happened to the people that Shin revealed Lelouch's identity to? Why did Akito not die when Shin commanded him to die? What did the people of St. Petersburg immediately believe that Leila was dead even though Smiles never provided any evidence? The whole sequence felt rushed and not realistic. What did Smiles gain from the collective consciousness that would require him to return the favor? And I guess a follow-up of that is, can people make a contract with the consciousness itself? Also, if the collective consciousness can transport Ashley to kill Smilus, why not just kill Smilus herself or itself or whatever it is? It's also amusing that no one even questions what they just saw after Ashley was transported to fight Smilus. It's almost like they're used to seeing the collective consciousness transport people all the time. And I don't like pointing out problems without solution, so here are some fixes that would have improved Akito the Exiled. Not having Lelouch in the story and instead just focusing on Shin as the main villain, who in his own right is fine, he doesn't need anyone else. Focus the entire story about Leila and Akito versus Shin. This would allow more time to develop her Geass powers and explain them without having to include the entire plot of the EU fighting the Eurobritannians. Or at least make that battle against the Eurobritannians a subplot. Make the goals of our protagonist in Akito the Exiled something more tangible and easier to follow, like how it was for Lelouch in Lelouch of the Rebellion. For example, Leila wants to help the Japanese. Okay, maybe the plot could have focused on that. Either don't have filler or keep the filler brief, especially when you only have 5 episodes to work with, and explain things better in each episode's opening narration. I found them to be simple and did not come even close to covering anything on the same level as the narrations in the original series. Okay, I'm done with the negatives of this series. Overall, I enjoyed this series, and those complaints were out of love and not hate because I want this to be the best series ever. So with that in mind, let's go over the best parts of Akito the Exiled. Oh, and this is a good time to mention that both the dub and sub are excellent. I love Leila's French accent, as well as the other European accents in the English dub version. But some have complained that it was hard to understand them at times. It was never a problem for me. If you own the series on Blu-ray, there's a part where the director explains the dubbing, and I highly recommend it. Did I mention the animations are beautiful? Because they are. If nothing else, this anime is such a treat to the eyes, with some fantastic scenes to boot. For example, anytime Apollo's chariot is used, the sound, the music, and the space shots are all done to perfection. It feels like you're up there with the characters, and I agree with for you that if this was the last thing I saw, I could do way worse. Also, with Apollo's chariot, we're introduced to the possibility of space travel in future Code Geass stories, something that I hope happens in Zia the Recapture. When Shin's adoptive sister is shown to have Geass, I was getting flashback of Yuffie. I'm not sure why. And that scene of the entire W0 squad getting gunned down was hard to watch, and I legitimately never saw that coming. It was similar to what happened at the Special Administrative Zone of Japan, only in this case, things were reversed and everyone lived. But the Japanese people in that zone, and of course Yuffie, were not as lucky. They did an excellent job of showing Akito and Shin's backstory through flashbacks, and the part at the end where Shin tells Akito to live, and the brothers legitimately showing love for each other, was one of the most powerful emotional moments of the series, and something that I think about often when reflecting on this OVA. The final battle at Castle Weissenwolf is an awesome ride, and it's why OVA 5 is my favorite in Akito the Exiled. Shin dying with Jeon at the end was a powerful moment, as not only was he able to accept Jeon's love, but also tell Akito that he wants him to live. It reminded me in some way when Yuffie died, because in this situation, we will never see this couple together after confessing their love for each other. The whole situation between Jeon and Shin was such a depressing part of the story, and this scene adds to it. I like the parallels of Shin's plan to put the world in chaos to Charles' plan to unite the world under one consciousness. Both wanted to destroy everything, but for different reasons. Shin wanted to eradicate the future, since living is a curse, and Charles wanted to keep things stagnant and make life eternal. The plan itself was to use Apollo's chariot to launch a bomb and destroy Pendragon, the capital of Britannia. This would lead to riots and chaos. If this plan sounds familiar, that's because Schneisel did the same thing, except his motivation was to free people from Lelouch. In his mind, death was a better option over having them live under Lelouch's reign. And ultimately, he was going to bomb the world into submission. I liked all the characters because they were all relatable and felt like actual people. They did a good job in the amount of time they had to give you enough information about the different people in the W0 unit. Despite my complaints with the gypsy part, I did enjoy it. Again, the problem is not really the part itself, but the fact that it was unnecessary filler. I love the romance between Akito and Leila. Despite it developing over a short period of time, it never felt contrived. The love that these two felt for one another was genuine, and some of that is due to the fantastic scenes that make this romance believable, and the romance was important because it gave Akito the desire to start living and stop acting like he should have died in the past. If you pay attention to Akito at the beginning and observe him at the end, you can see a change in his attitude for life. She really saved him in more ways than one. I like the virtual surgery scene because it reminded me of that part with Yuffie in R1, and it helped us learn more about Dr. Sophie Randall. Plus, I like the idea of telesurgery. Ayano, Ryu, and Yukiya just wanted a place to call home, and Akito just wanted a family, and it was rewarding to see both get this at the end when they decide to live with the gypsies. You might not have noticed this, but there were weird pop culture references and other random stuff in Akito the Exiled. Ashley asked John, "Are you feeling lucky?" which is a reference to Dirty Harry with Clint Eastwood, who also says, "Are you feeling lucky, punk?" And the context is similar, where he asked the criminal if his gun was out of ammo. Also, the same weapon that Ashley is holding looks similar to the .45 Magnum that Harry is holding. Maybe Ashley was imitating him. Yukiya asked Akito, "Do you know how I got these scars?" which is a reference to the Joker from The Dark Knight. When Leila talks to Akito about her parents in the first OVA, she says her parents had sex, describing it with the F word, but only in the dub for some reason. They use the classic "just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true" line in reference to Kingsley's plan. They also reference social media, which I do not believe existed in Lucha of the Rebellion, and keep in mind this is a mequel. So with that all in mind, Akito the Exiled was a mixed bag, with mostly positive elements. Even though it's a standalone story, only Code Geass fans can really appreciate this, and thus should watch it, despite its issues. What's unfortunate is that the plot is the weakest point of the series, favoring instead Knightmare Frame action and a more character-driven story. And there's nothing wrong with character-driven stories, and this will be a case-by-case basis in terms of if this will bother you or not. The story added so much new lore into the Code Geass universe, and I like how it took place in the EU, which is a location that we never see much of in the Lucha of the Rebellion. We only recently got more footage with the new alternative universe, but even those never really discuss much of the politics in the same way that Akito does. If you're a fan of this universe, you owe it to yourself to watch this OVA. I wish the plot was better, and maybe in the future we could get some additional content that adds to the story. The guy on that cover of the Zero Capture looks oddly familiar, but if this is it, then all we can do is try to accept this OVA for what it is and enjoy it. That's what I did, and that's what I think you should do. If you want more Code Geass content, please check out other videos or read my articles on my blog. This month I have a special plan for my anime streaming guide, so it's something you're not going to want to miss. But now I want to hear from you. Did you like Akito the Exiled, or absolutely hate it? Can we have a Code Geass story without Lelouch as the lead? Why or why not? Let me know in the comment section below. Remember, the world is not a dark place, and tomorrow will be a good day. Thanks for watching.